You know, it's hard to believe it's almost 2 years since I did that major upgrade to the workshop. And the reason for that upgrade was this panel saw, this sliding panel saw. And I'd wanted a sliding panel saw for quite a while before I bought this one. But what was holding me back was the idea that they just take up too much space, that my workshop wasn't big enough for one. Particularly with this sliding carriage and the outrigger, I just thought it won't fit. But that's when I was fixed on the idea that the table saw was the center of the workshop. And some of you will remember my old layout was my table saw was in the center of the workshop. But my thinking was wrong, because as you can see, moving the table saw from the center and putting it up against the wall actually gave me a lot more space than I had. So much so that I kept my old table saw and I have two next to each other, and there is still a lot of space in this workshop. So it has actually worked out really well. And after having used the saw for 2 years, I have to say it's fantastic. I love it and I'm so glad I bought it. Now, let's be real. This is by no means a high-end saw. I would put it at entry level, given the price point. Other saws, or if you want to upgrade to something much better, you're looking at least twice, 3 times the price and beyond. But don't let that fool you. You get a lot of saw for the price of this. But although I think the saw is fantastic and it is everything that I need, there are areas for improvement on the saw, and that's what I want to cover in this video. So the main areas I want to focus on are dust collection. We'll get inside the cabinet and have a look in there. The way the dust collection works on this saw is the blade actually has a shroud around the blade, and the dust extractor hose or pipe is connected directly to that shroud. I think that needs improving. Second thing is this is not a zero clearance insert plate like all other saws, but this one looks very different to a conventional insert plate like those. They're very easy to copy or remake, but this one just looks a little trickier. It's long and thin, but there is a huge gap there, so that needs closing up. And the third thing is the riving knife. You can see there, that's the original that holds the guard assembly. I don't want to modify that. I want to keep the original parts, but that is higher than the blade. The insert plate needs to be 3 millimeters thick, and that's 3 millimeters. So I can make the two out of the same material. So we'll take off that cover there and get inside the cabinet and have a look what's going on in there. But before we do that, let's get a couple of very unscientific observations of what the dust extraction looks like in its current form. Even though the dust extraction looks like it's working well from above, that's a different story down here. Obviously, the dust extraction is not picking up every piece of sawdust because quite a lot of it is ending up inside the cabinet. Now, I think it has to do with this shroud here that's around the blade, because the dust extractor pipe is only sucking dust from there and it's not able to suck dust out of the cabinet itself. So I'm going to remove the shroud and remove the pipe inside the cabinet and just have the outlet at the side there. But before I do any of that, I've got a piece of clear Perspex, which I'm going to seal up the cabinet again, and that way we can look inside, and I'll run the saw as I normally would with the dust extraction on, just to see what's happening with the air and the sawdust. Well, that was interesting and not what I expected. I thought I was going to see a ton of dust just floating around that cabinet, but that wasn't the case. There was hardly any at all. Maybe the shroud around the blade is actually a good idea and doesn't need improving. But what I'll do first is I will take it off and we'll run the test again and see what it looks like without that in place. I think it's pretty conclusive that the shroud around the blade is a good idea, and I'll probably be leaving it in place. Without it, there was just a ton of sawdust in that cabinet, uncontrolled and just falling onto the ground. So that wasn't a good idea at all. And to be quite honest, the amount of sawdust we saw at the bottom of the cabinet in the first place, that's over a period of longer than a year, between a year and 2 years. I have cleaned it out once only, and it was a very long time ago. So in the scheme of things, it's not that bad.
With that done now, I can get in and clean out all that sawdust. And because I'm reinstating the original setup of the shroud and dust hose, I'm going to store those spare parts from the saw back in the cabinet. That's good storage space, and it's out of the way. I also went the extra step and sealed up around the bottom of the cabinet, just so any dust that does build up in there is contained within the saw.
I will make one modification though to the shroud before I put it back on, and that is to seal up this gap here. I think this gap gives opportunity for sawdust to escape out of the shroud and into the cabinet before it gets picked up by the dust extractor. And the reason for this gap is for the riving knife mounting mechanism. It just allows it to move up and down as you raise and lower the blade. But I think I can box this out around that and hopefully just improve the dust extraction a little bit more. So to make this little extension, I'm going to build on the end of the shroud here to hopefully seal up this gap here a bit better. I'm going to use this stuff here. It's aluminium composite material. It's 3mm thick. It's got a hard plastic core and 2 aluminium veneers either side. It's really, really sturdy. I think it's going to be great to make that. I think it's also going to be perfect for making the new riving knife for the saw and the insert plate. So this extension piece for the shroud just needs to be a C shape or U shape, whichever way you look at it. And what I'm going to try and do with this material is use a V-bit in the router and cut a groove along where I want to fold it almost all the way through, but keeping that outside aluminium veneer intact, and hopefully fold it up and then fold it up again. Wish me luck.
I made a very detailed technical drawing of how I'm going to seal up that gap. This is a top-down view, and the blue section is the existing shroud showing the opening for the riving knife. The green part is the mounting arm for the riving knife that moves up and down with the blade. It sits on the outside and behind the shroud. The red part is the piece I'm going to make, which will only be fixed to the front of the shroud. That still leaves this gap here in yellow, which will be filled with that strip of foam you saw. The foam strip is just held in place with double-sided tape. I cut the composite panel down to size, and that plastic core made a bit of a mess even with the dust extraction on. I then routed in the 2 folding grooves on the router table.
Okay, so that didn't turn out as I was hoping. The pieces have actually come apart. The problem was the router bit just wasn't deep enough to clear enough plastic out so that these could fold at a full 90-degree angle. The option was to do a second pass by raising the bit up, but it had to be raised just ever so slightly, and that was too risky, so I didn't go for that because you could have punched through the aluminium on the other side. So I tried to scrape out some plastic, but that didn't work either. And because that aluminium is so thin, it only has about 2 or 3 bends in it before it snaps anyway. So you take a bit out, you bend it to see if it's going to work, and before you know it's falling apart because you've bent it too many times. So we'll see what we can do with this. I'll try and salvage this, but yeah, if not, we'll go for something else.
I did manage to salvage the shroud extension by using some aluminium angle to rivet the pieces together into the shape I wanted. This piece will be bolted to the shroud with bolts and wing nuts because I want it to be removable, so I marked up the position of the screws and drilled the holes. I then mucked up the extension piece to cut some slots for the mounting screws. I wanted the mounting bolts to be fixed to the shroud, so I used mushroom head bolts for their low profile and fixed them in place with nylock nuts. I cut corresponding slots in the extension piece and sealed off the end. It just slots over the mounting screws, and with these spaces I made, I can fix it in place with wing nuts. And to show how this will work, imagine this steel rule is the riving knife mounting bracket. And fitting the shroud back in place, you can see how that foam strip seals around that mounting bracket. Well, that was definitely a worthwhile exercise to confirm that the original dust extraction setup works just fine, and hopefully a little better with the blade shroud now fully sealed up. I reinstalled the shroud, and here is the saw with everything back in place, including the storage tub for the spare parts. The next upgrade to the dust extraction is replacing the current blast gate with a better option. As you can see here, my standard blast gate design is difficult to use because of where it has to be positioned. I have to lean over the slider and a fair way down towards the floor to operate it, and the pulling and pushing force required is hard on my arm and shoulder. So what I'm going to replace it with is one of these. This is a 3D printed giant ball valve made by Anthony from Barber's Paddock Woodworking. And what's great about this is how easy it is to operate. It only requires the slightest amount of effort to open and close, so it's going to help with that part of it. To attach it, he also makes these flanges that fit over the ends, so I'm going to fix one end to the side panel of the saw, and the other side will have the flexible hose clamped over it. That solves the issue of being easy to operate, but it doesn't solve the reach issue. But I have a pretty good idea for that. I'm going to use this old lawnmower throttle cable to operate the blast gate from a different location on the saw, somewhere that's much easier for me to reach. I had hoped to use the original lever, but it doesn't have enough travel to fully open the ball valve, so I'll have to come up with something else. But for now, let's get these blast gates swapped over. The throttle cable wire is malleable, so I was able to reshape it and fix it to the blast gate lever with a simple bracket. It works well for now. I'm going to make a very simple, straight, push-pull lever mechanism for the blast gate cable out of some hardwood offcuts I have. I don't think this part needs any explanation, so I'll just let the video run. Now you may have noticed in some of those previous scenes that the new riving knife and insert plate were already installed because I made them at the same time, but to keep the video flowing a little better, I'll show you how I made them now. I used the original parts to copy the shapes I needed. And for the riving knife, I shortened the height a little so it was level at the top of the blade. And I made the insert plate a little wider to fill the gap between the blade. Making these components was a lot easier than I thought. Using the aluminium composite panel helped with that because it was so easy to work. It cut like butter on the table saw and bandsaw and sanded really well. If I didn't have that panel, I would have just used solid 3mm aluminium plate, which would have still been workable using my woodworking tools, files and sander. The original insert plate has a large gap for the scoring blade, but I don't really use it, so I'll fill that in with the new insert. If I ever need to use the scoring blade, I'll just swap out the new insert plate for the original just for those cuts. Well, I'm really happy with the improvements that I've made to the saw. They might not seem like much, but they will make a big difference. Particularly the new blast gate design. Having that on-off lever now in a location that's easy to reach, right next to the on-off switch, is going to make life a lot easier. Now, I know this video wasn't very exciting, but hopefully you got something out of it and you enjoyed it. And if you're still here, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.